The first thing I saw when I woke up was not my children. It was a photograph of them smiling under a white cruise ship railing while a plastic mask fogged beside my mouth. My daughter, Elaine, had posted it 14 minutes earlier. I know that because the nurse had placed my phone in a clear hospital bag on the rolling table and the screen lit up before I understood where I was. There they were, Elaine in sunglasses, Mark holding a drink with a paper umbrella, Joel pointing at the ocean like he had discovered water. Behind them was a banner that said nothing. I could read clearly just bright colors and vacation light. Above my bed, a monitor kept counting my heartbeats as if it did not trust me to keep track. I tried to lift my hand. A tube tugged at the back of it. My throat felt scraped raw. The room smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. Somewhere beyond the curtain, a machine sighed in a rhythm that was almost breathing for someone else. "Mr. Reed," a nurse said, stepping into view, "you are in Mercy North. You had a serious reaction to a medication combination. You are stable now." Stable is a strange word to hear when your own body feels borrowed. I tried to speak, but only a rough sound came out. The nurse brought a sponge swab to my lips and told me not to push. Her name badge said Nora Kim RN. She had the calm face of a person who had seen panic enough times to stop being impressed by it. My eyes moved back to the phone. Nora followed my gaze. Her expression changed by a fraction not enough for anyone else to notice. But I had spent 34 years driving a school bus in winter storms and reading children in the rearview mirror. I knew what people looked like when they were deciding whether truth would hurt more now or later. "Your family has been notified," she said. I blinked once. She did not say they were coming. My mind reached for the last clear memory before the hospital. I was standing in my apartment kitchen with an orange prescription bottle in one hand and my phone in the other. The room had tilted. I had called Elaine first because she always said she wanted to be the practical one. No answer. Mark second. No answer. Joel third. Straight to voicemail. Then the floor rose at me like a dark wave. I remembered the pharmacy warning. I remembered telling Mark that morning something felt wrong. "Dad, we board at 4, he had said. "Please do not make this another thing." Another thing. Nora adjusted the blanket over my chest. "Someone did answer," she said quietly, as if she had been holding that sentence until I could carry it. "Ms. Vega." My eyes moved to the whiteboard across from the bed. Under emergency contact in blue marker, someone had written Marisol Vega. Not Elaine, not Mark, not Joel. Marisol from apartment 2B, who brought soup when the elevator broke and scolded me for salting canned chili. Marisol, whose husband had died 3 years earlier and who still set 2 coffee cups on her balcony some mornings before remembering. The nurse saw the question on my face. "She has been here since last night," Nora said. "She would not leave." Beyond the glass, I heard a sharp woman's voice at the nurse's station. "I am his daughter. You cannot keep me from my own father." Nora looked toward the door, then back at me. "The patient advocate is on her way," she said. That was when I understood the photograph was not the worst thing my children had done. It was only the part they had been proud enough to post. The name on the whiteboard looked too ordinary to carry that much weight. Marisol Vega, blue marker, square letters. A little underline beneath the phone number that someone had erased halfway and written again. I stared at it until the room sharpened around me. The folded towel under my left hand, the IV pump. The yellow fall wristband near my wrist, the window blinds closed against morning glare. My children were in the hallway, and I was looking at my neighbor's name. I did not hate them in that moment. Hate takes strength. I had barely enough strength to swallow. What I felt first was embarrassment, the old reflex of a father who thinks he must explain his own hurt before anyone else notices it. Maybe Elaine had bad signal on the ship. Maybe Mark thought the first call was a billing reminder. Maybe Joel had handed his phone to one of his kids and never checked it. Then I heard Elaine again. "He is confused," she said outside the room. "He probably told you all kinds of things. We need to see the chart." The word confused moved through me like cold water. Nora stepped out and pulled the curtain most of the way closed. I could still see the thin line of hallway through the gap. Shoes crossed it. White sneakers, brown loafers, the polished black shoes Mark wore when he wanted a room to know he had money even when he did not. My memory came back in pieces. Not all of it, enough. The senior center, a folding table with pamphlets about advanced directives, a volunteer notary with silver hair, Marisol sitting beside me, her reading glasses low on her nose, asking 3 times if I was sure. "Walter, this is serious," she had said. "That is why I am doing it." It had been 4 months earlier, after I slipped on ice outside the senior center, and Elaine told me I was lucky I had not ruined her quarterly review by needing a ride. Mark had joked that I should put an ankle monitor on myself so the family could track me. Joel had texted a thumbs-up emoji when I asked if one of them could take me to a follow-up appointment. That was the day I stopped pretending availability was the same as love. I did not remove my children because I wanted to punish them. I signed the directive because I had finally accepted a truth I did not like. In an emergency, the person who answers the phone matters more than the person who shares your last name. The form did not give Marisol my life. It did not give her my apartment, my bank account, my memories, or my dignity. It named her as the person doctors could speak to if I could not speak for myself. It told the hospital what treatment I wanted. It told them who knew my wishes and who did not. I had forgotten in the fog of the ICU that I had been careful. Then a woman I had not seen before stepped into my room. She wore a navy blazer over green scrubs and carried a clipboard with a red stripe across the top. Her badge said, "Tessa Monroe, Patient Advocate." She came close enough that I did not have to strain. "Mr. Reed," she said, "your children are asking to change your discharge contact and receive full medical information. Before we speak with them, I need to assess what you understand and what you want." I tried to answer. My voice cracked into almost nothing. Tessa did not rush me. She placed a small dry erase board in my hand and uncapped a marker. "You do not have to perform for anyone," she said. "Just tell me who you trust in this room." My fingers shook so badly, the first letter looked like a branch in wind. M, then A. By the time I finished writing, Marisol Elaine was crying in the hallway, loudly enough for people to hear. It was the first time that week she had sounded like a daughter. 3 days before I woke in, a pharmacist named Asha Patel slid my prescription bag across the counter and did not let go. That is the kind of detail a man remembers after his body betrays him. Not the whole conversation, not every medical word, but the way her hand stayed on the paper bag, as if it had become a door she did not want me walking through too fast. "Mr. Reed," she said, "this new medication can interact with one you already take. I need you to call Dr. Henley before you start it." I was not careless. I had been taking blood pressure pills since my wife Ruth was alive. I kept them in a plastic organizer with blue letters for morning and white letters for night. I wrote refill dates on a calendar shaped like old buses, because Elaine's youngest had given it to me as a joke, and I liked pretending it was art. "Is it dangerous?" I asked. Asha chose her words carefully. "It can be, especially if you feel dizzy faint, short of breath, or unusually weak. I am sending a note to the doctor's office, but I want you to call too." There was no dramatic thunderclap, no movie warning, just a pharmacist doing her job in fluorescent light while a man behind me sighed because I was slowing the line. I called Dr. Henley's office from the parking lot. They said the nurse would call back. Then I called Elaine. No answer. I called Mark. He answered with wind in the background and irritation already loaded. "Dad, if this is about the cruise, I cannot talk long." "It is about my prescription." He laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because laughter can be used like a locked gate. "Did you read the little paper again? Those sheets say everything can kill you." "The pharmacist told me to call the doctor." "Then call the doctor." "I did." "Good, handled." The word stung because he used it the way people use a stamp. He wanted the issue processed and off his desk. I told him I had been dizzy that morning. He said the whole family had paid for the cruise months ago, and Elaine had coordinated cabins, and Joel had finally taken time off. He said I always found a way to make important events about my health. I reminded him I had not asked anyone to cancel. I had asked him to stay near his phone. He said, "Dad, we bored at 4. Please do not make this another thing." Another thing. My wife had been another thing when chemo appointments fell on Elaine's fundraiser. My retirement dinner had been another thing when Mark's roof needed replacing, and he needed the check more than he needed the speech. My birthday had been another thing when Joel's twins had soccer, and nobody wanted to drive across town. After Mark hung up, I stared through the windshield at the pharmacy sign. Asha had taped a yellow note to the outside of the prescription bag. "Call doctor before starting." I did call again, twice. That evening, Marisol found me sitting on the apartment stairs because I had stopped halfway up and could not make the hallway hold still. She took the prescription bag from my hand, read the yellow note, and said, "We are calling again, and this time I am staying on the line." That was how care looked. Not heroic, not loud, just someone refusing to let the phone ring into emptiness. By the time Dr. Henley's nurse called back the next morning, I was already worse. By the time Marisol knocked on my door that night, I did not answer. And by the time my children ordered dessert on deck 7, the hospital had called every number I had once been ashamed to remove. The directive began with a fall that did not break anything except the story I had been telling myself. It was February, the kind of Ohio morning when sidewalks look dry until your foot finds the glassy patch. I had gone to the senior center to teach a defensive driving class for older adults. That still makes me smile a little. A retired bus driver telling other retirees to check mirrors, leave space, and never trust a green light just because it wants to be believed. After class, I stepped off the curb wrong. My hip hit first, then my shoulder. My glasses slid under a parked car. For a moment, I lay there looking at a gray sky and thinking Ruth would have scolded me for wearing smooth-soled shoes. Marisol was the one who found me. She had come to pick up tax forms from the center office. She did not flap her hands or make a show of fear. She knelt beside me, asked if I could feel my feet, and told a teenager nearby to get the front desk. The urgent care doctor said nothing was broken. He wanted someone to stay with me that evening in case dizziness returned. I called Elaine from the exam room. "Today, hi," she said. "Only for a few hours." "Dad, I have a review meeting at 3. Can they keep you there?" I looked at the paper sheet under my hands. "It is urgent care, honey, not a hotel." She sighed. "Do not do that." Do not do. That meant do not make her feel guilty. My children had become fluent in that language. Mark said he was across town. Joel did not answer. Elaine called back 20 minutes later and said, "Maybe I should consider one of those alert buttons people wear around their necks." "I need a person tonight," I said. "I am trying to be practical." Marisol drove me home. She made soup from a packet and toast from bread that should have been thrown out. Then she sat in my armchair and read every pamphlet the senior center had placed in my folder. "You should fill these out," she said. I told her my children would be offended. "Walter," she said, "offended people do not become reliable because you need them." That sentence stayed with me. The next week, the senior center hosted a legal clinic. Not a law firm with mahogany chairs, folding tables, retired volunteers, a notary who wore purple sneakers. They explained advanced directives, healthcare proxies, release permissions, what the forms did and did not do. They said naming someone did not mean giving up control. It meant leaving instructions for the hour when your own voice might not be available. I took 3 copies home. Elaine laughed when she saw them on my kitchen table. "You are making Marisol your medical person now. If I cannot speak," Mark said, "Great, the neighbor gets a badge." Joel said nothing, but his wife texted later that involving outsiders in family business was hurtful. I almost tore the forms up that night. A father can survive many things and still be undone by the idea that his children think caution is betrayal. Then Marisol knocked and handed me a small container of rice pudding. "You do not have to choose me," she said, "but choose someone who answers." So I did. I signed the directive at the senior center the following Tuesday. 2 volunteers witnessed it. The notary stamped it. The social worker scanned it into the hospital network portal and gave me a copy for my refrigerator envelope. There was nothing dramatic about it. That was the point. The most important boundaries in a life are often made on ordinary paper under ordinary lights, before the people who will resent them understand they have already lost the chance to be trusted. Room 412 had a glass door which meant my children could see me before they could reach me. I watched them gather outside it, like a committee arriving late to a meeting they expected to chair. Elaine stood closest to the nurse's station, still in crew's clothes under a gray cardigan she must have bought at the airport. Mark held his phone in one hand and a paper coffee cup in the other. Joel stayed half a step behind them, face pale eyes moving everywhere except toward my bed. For one ridiculous second I noticed their tans. Sun sits differently on people who earned it without fear. Nora stepped into the hallway. I could not hear every word through the door, but I could hear tone. Elaine's was hurt authority. Mark's was polished impatience. Joel's was low enough to disappear. "We need his chart," Elaine said. "We need to know what happened." Nora's answer was calm. "I can take your contact information and notify the patient advocate you are here." "We are his children." "I understand." "Then why are we being treated like strangers?" Nora did not say what I thought, because strangers sometimes answer faster. Mark moved closer to the counter. "There has obviously been a misunderstanding. Our father gets confused when he is stressed. He has a neighbor who inserts herself into things." That word inserts reached me clearly. Marisol had watered my plants when Ruth died, because I had forgotten plants were living things. Marisol had driven me to the eye doctor after cataract surgery and argued with me about baseball in the waiting room. Marisol had sat in a plastic chair somewhere beyond the ICU doors while my children stood on a ship and let voicemail collect like dust. She had not inserted herself. She had arrived. Tessa Monroe entered the hallway from the left clipboard tucked against her ribs. People like Tessa do not need to raise their voices. The structure of a hospital already stands behind them when they are right. "I am Mr. Reed's patient advocate," she said. "We can discuss the process in a family meeting after I speak with him." "No," Elaine said. "You need to speak with us first. My father does not understand how this looks. How this looks. Not how I felt. Not whether I'd been scared. Not whether I had asked for them while machines counted my pulse. How this looked." Mark lowered his voice, and because the hall quieted at the same time, I heard enough. "We need to fix the paperwork before discharge planning starts." Tessa's head turned slightly. "What paperwork are you referring to?" "Whatever gave that woman access." "That woman." I closed my eyes. When I opened them, Joel was looking through the glass at me. For a moment, he did not look like a man with a wife and 2 children and a mortgage. He looked 8 years old standing at the bus garage after Ruth forgot pickup time during her first round of treatment. I had made him hot chocolate from a vending machine and told him people come late sometimes, but that does not mean they are not coming. He looked away first. Tessa stepped into my room and closed the door behind her. "Mr. Reed," she said, "your children are requesting a discharge conference this afternoon." I held the marker. My hand trembled, but less than before. "Do you want to attend?" The answer cost me more strength than I expected. Not because it was hard to decide, but because writing it made the truth official. "Yes," Tessa nodded once. Outside the glass, Elaine wiped her eyes for an audience of nurses. Inside room 412. I began saving my breath for the people who would have to hear me use it. Tessa Monroe did not treat my room like a stage. That mattered to me. By then, my children had turned the hallway into a little courtroom where every nurse became a witness to their concern. Elaine cried in a way that made people offer tissues. Mark spoke in low, serious sentences with medical words he had probably searched on his phone. Joel stood between them and the wall quiet enough to be mistaken for innocent. Tessa came in, pulled the curtain until the hallway became only shapes, and lowered herself into the chair beside my bed. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I am going to ask you some questions, not to trap you, not to prove anything to your children. I need to understand whether you can make decisions right now." I nodded. She asked my full name, Walter James Reed. She asked where I was. Mercy North Hospital. I see you 4th floor. She asked the year. I wrote it slowly, angry that numbers I had known all my life now required effort. She asked why I had been admitted. Medication reaction, I wrote. Heart rhythm. Low pressure. She looked at the board, then at me. Do you understand that you signed an advance directive naming Marisol Vega as healthcare proxy if you could not speak for yourself? How? Yes. Do you understand that if you have capacity, your decisions are yours? I had not known how much I needed to hear that until she said it. Yes. Tessa's face softened by the smallest measure. Then today your directive is not replacing your voice. It is evidence of what you wanted when you were afraid your voice might be missing. That sentence did something medicine had not done yet. It returned a part of me to myself. I had spent years being the practical father. I drove through snow before dawn with 30 children behind me and parents waiting at curbs with coffee in their hands. I knew which kids needed me to slow down near a barking dog, which ones had no gloves, which ones talked too much because home was too quiet. My job had been to get people safely from one place to another. Somewhere after Ruth died, my children began treating me like a route they no longer wanted to drive. Tessa showed me a printed copy of the directive. My signature leaned a little left the way it had since arthritis started tightening the knuckle of my index finger. Below it were 2 witness names and the notary stamp from the senior center. There was also a hospital scan date from February. No magic, no secret takeover, no neighbor stealing authority. Just a man who had listened when neglect whispered its warning. Your children have requested discharge planning, Tessa said. They are allowed to request a meeting. They are not allowed to decide for you without authority, and they are not allowed to receive information you do not authorize. I wrote slowly, Marisol. She is in the family waiting room. She has not asked for anything beyond your stated wishes. That sounded like Marisol. She could argue with a grocery clerk for overcharging 12 cents, but she would not take a room that was not offered. Do you want her in the conference? Yes. Do you want all 3 children present? I hesitated, not because I needed them, because part of me still wanted them to become the children I had raised if I gave them one more chance. I wrote yes. I want them to hear it from me. Tessa read it, then capped the marker. Then we will make sure this meeting is about your plan, not their performance. Outside the curtain, Elaine's voice rose again. He would never choose a neighbor over us. I looked at my signature on the directive and thought of all the times I had chosen them. Then I thought of every phone that had not rung back. For the first time since waking, I did not feel abandoned. I felt prepared. I did not see Marisol until nearly noon. That was important, because later my children tried to use it against her. They said if she cared so much, she would have been at my bedside. When I opened my eyes, they said she liked being listed on forms, but not doing the hard parts. They said many things people say when proof has already moved against them, and character assassination is the only tool left on the table. The truth was simpler. The ICU had rules. I had been unstable through the night. There were sterile procedures, shift changes, respiratory checks, and periods when nobody without clearance could come through the doors. Marisol did not argue with the staff. She did not demand to be treated like family. She sat in a hard chair outside the unit with her purse on her knees and a notebook in her lap, asking every 2 hours whether there was anything she was allowed to know and whether I was still safe. Nora told me that when she finally came in. Marisol stood at the foot of my bed, as if the room might reject her if she stepped too close. She was 63, small and straight-backed, with gray threaded through black hair she pinned at the nape of her neck. She wore the blue cardigan Ruth used to tease her about because it had one missing button she refused to replace. "Walter," she said, "it was not dramatic. That is the thing about people who really show up. They do not need an entrance." I tried to smile. My face did something uneven. She came closer, then set her hand on the bed rail and looked me over. The way practical people do. Tubes, monitor, blanket, eyes, color, breathing. "You scared me," she said. I wrote on the board, "Sorry. Do not apologize for almost dying. It is bad manners." That made Nora laugh behind her mask, and the sound loosened something in my chest. Marisol pulled a small spiral notebook from her purse. Tessa said I can tell you what happened if you want. I nodded. She had knocked on my door at 8:10 p.m. because my kitchen light was on and my television had been playing the same game show for too long. When I did not answer, she called building maintenance. The super opened the door because I had signed a wellness check permission form after Ruth died. They found me on the kitchen floor breathing but confused. You kept saying, "Call Elaine," Marisol said. I closed my eyes. I did, she added softly. I called Elaine, Mark, Joel. Then I called 911. The hospital called them too. She had written the times down. Not because she was building a case, she said, but because fear makes minutes slippery, and she wanted to remember what had been done. Elaine 8:18 p.m. voicemail. Mark 8:21 p.m. voicemail. Joel 8:24 p.m. rang twice, voicemail. Hospital operator to Elaine 10:03 p.m. Hospital operator to Mark 10:05 p.m. Hospital operator to Joel 10:06 p.m. Marisol answered every call after that. I could not come in when they were working on you, she said, but I was there. I looked through the glass. My children were still in the hallway, tired now, irritated by the amount of time Truth was taking. Marisol followed my gaze. I am not trying to take anything from them, she said. I wrote you answered. Her eyes filled. She blinked once hard and nodded. Outside the room, Mark began talking with his hands. Inside the room, Marisol placed her notebook beside my phone. No accusation, no speech, just dates and times, written by a woman who understood that love is often a record of showing up when nobody is clapping. The patient portal was uglier than the cruise photo. Photos can lie by smiling. Logs do not smile. Tessa brought a hospital tablet into my room after confirming what I wanted to see. She warned me first. Good advocates do that. They do not throw truth at a patient and call it honesty. They ask whether he has enough strength to catch it. This is not about blame right now, she said. It is about understanding who received what information before the discharge meeting. I nodded. The tablet showed a list of notifications. Some were automatic. Some were staff notes. Some were outbound calls. The hospital had sent an emergency admission alert through the family access permissions I had not fully revoked in February. Elaine, Mark, and Joel could not see clinical details without authorization, but they could see that I had been admitted and that the hospital was trying to reach them. Elaine opened the first alert at 10:31 p.m. Mark opened another at 10:42. Joel never opened his. I stared at those lines until the numbers stopped behaving like numbers and became decisions. For months after Ruth died, I had excused everything with distance. Elaine lived 30 minutes away, but worked too much. Mark had kids and debts and a wife who thought old people complained for sport. Joel was young in the family way, which meant everyone kept calling him young long after he should have become accountable. The log did not care about my excuses. There is one more entry, Tessa said. She pointed near the bottom. At 11:16 p.m., someone using Mark's account had clicked a response option attached to a non-clinical administrative alert, family aware / follow-up pending. Handled? That word appeared in a status column. Handled. I thought of Mark in the pharmacy parking lot saying, "Good handled." I thought of him on the ship, maybe in a cabin with folded towels and little chocolates touching a screen, so the alert would stop bothering him. My emergency had become a notification to clear. Could someone else have clicked it? I wrote. Tessa nodded. Technically, if they had access to his account, we will not assume beyond the log. We can ask him. That was another thing I noticed. Tessa did not embellish. She did not make my pain more useful by adding certainty she did not have. She stayed with what the record proved. The record proved enough. Marisol stood near the window, arms folded across her blue cardigan. She looked angry in a way I had rarely seen from her, not loud, just fixed. He knew, she said. I looked down. My hands had steadied. Pain does that sometimes. Past a certain point, the shaking stops because the body understands there is no room left for surprise. Tessa scrolled to the call log. It showed the hospital operator's attempts to transfer to voicemail the messages left with basic instructions to call back immediately. It showed Marisol's incoming calls to the ICU desk. It showed the pharmacy notation scanned from the medication review. The truth was not one big reveal. It was a row of small failures lined up so neatly no one could pretend they had been accidents. Your children are asking that all medical updates route to Elaine after the conference, Tessa said. Do you want that? I did not need the board for that answer. I shook my head. The movement hurt, but it was mine. Tessa noted it. For the first time, I understood that control does not always return like strength. Sometimes it returns like a checkbox nobody else gets to click. My children did not arrive with flowers. They arrived with a rehab brochure. I saw it first in Elaine's hand when Tessa allowed them into the small family consult room across from the ICU doors. I was not there yet. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but Tessa met with them first to explain boundaries. Nora raised the head of my bed so I could see through the glass when the door opened. That was how I noticed the brochure folded in thirds glossy with a stock photograph of smiling seniors and a fountain out front. Later, Tessa told me what they had proposed. Ridgeway Extended Care. I knew the name. Every senior in our apartment building knew the name. It was not the worst place in the state, which is a sentence nobody should have to use when talking about where a father recovers from almost dying. It was 40 miles away, near the airport, easy for Elaine to coordinate from her office and for Mark to visit without crossing downtown. It has availability, Elaine said. Availability, another polished word. Marisol had spent the morning asking the case manager what the care team actually recommended. A short-term cardiac rehab program near my apartment, physical therapy, medication reconciliation, follow-up with Dr. Henley, a home safety check before I returned, rides to appointments until I could drive again, practical things, boring things, the kind of things that save a life after the dramatic part is over. Elaine wanted Ridgeway because her neighbor's aunt had gone there once. Mark wanted it because he had already called and learned they accepted my insurance. Joel said nothing, which had become his contribution to the family. He cannot live alone anymore, Elaine said. Tessa asked, Did Mr. Reed tell you that he is 68? I wish I could say that number did not hurt. It did. Not because I was ashamed of age, but because Elaine used it like evidence in a trial I had not been invited to attend. 68 meant I had driven safely through more storms than she had ever watched from a window. 68 meant I knew which bills to pay first, how to make soup from what was left, how to sit beside a dying wife without asking the room to make it easier. 68 did not mean my children could trade my recovery for convenience. Marisol was not in that first conversation. She waited where Tessa told her to wait. That also mattered. She did not grab for authority. She respected process, even when the process was moving through people who had not respected me. When Tessa returned to my room, she summarized everything without drama. Your children prefer Ridgeway. The care team does not recommend making that decision today without your participation. Ms. Vega has asked that the cardiac rehab option be considered. I wrote ratings. Tessa did not smile, but I saw approval in her eyes. We can provide quality information and discharge criteria. We cannot choose for you. Good. I had spent too long letting my children convert preference into command. The meeting is still at 3, she said. We can bring you by wheelchair if your nurse clears it. I looked at the glass door. Elaine was now sitting with her head in her hands. Mark was pacing. Joel stared at the floor. They looked like people under pressure. For a moment, I wondered whether I was being cruel. Then my phone lit up again on the rolling table. A delayed notification from Elaine's cruise album had finally pushed through the hospital Wi-Fi. Another picture. All of them at dinner. Mark grinning over a lobster tail. Joel's kids wearing paper crowns. Elaine's caption said, "Making memories while we can." I picked up the marker. I wrote wheelchair, because if my children were going to make decisions about the rest of my life, they were going to do it while looking at the life they almost missed losing. The first person my children cornered was not me. It was Marisol. That told me more than they meant to reveal. I saw it from the ICU doors while Nora and a respiratory therapist helped shift me into the wheelchair. My legs felt like wet rope. Every movement had to be negotiated with tubes, wires, blankets, and the sudden humiliation of needing 3 people to do what I once did before breakfast. Still, I watched through the glass as Elaine crossed the waiting room toward Marisol with Mark beside her. Marisol had been standing by the vending machines reading the ingredient list on a pack of peanut butter crackers. She looked up when Elaine said her name. I could not hear everything. I heard enough. You had no right, Elaine said. Marisol placed the crackers back in the machine tray without buying them. Your father gave me a responsibility. He was lonely. You took advantage of that. Mark stepped in. This is family business. Marisol looked from him to Elaine, then toward Joel, who had stopped several feet away. Then you should have answered his family, Saking, she said. No shouting, no victory in it. Just a sentence with its back straight. Elaine pointed toward the ICU. You think because you brought soup and signed some form, you get to decide where our father goes. No, Marisol said. Walter decides if he can. His directive decides if he cannot. I do not get to decide because I care about him. I get asked because he wrote down that he trusted me. Mark's jaw tightened. We can challenge that. You can talk to Ms. Monroe. I am talking to you. Then you are wasting the time you could spend apologizing. I almost laughed, but it became a cough, and Nora steadied the mask near my face. Easy, she said. Easy was impossible, but I tried. Tessa appeared at the waiting room entrance before Mark could answer. Again, she did not hurry. She did not need to. Hospitals are full of people who think volume can bend rules. Advocates learn to move at the speed of policy. The conference room is ready, she said. Elaine wiped at her eyes again. I want it noted that we object to this woman being present. It is noted, Tessa said. Mr. Reed requested Ms. Vega's presence. He is not thinking clearly. That was when Nora pushed my wheelchair through the ICU doors. My children turned. I wish I could say I looked strong. I did not. I looked like a man who had been pulled back from the edge by medicine skill and someone else's answered phone. My hospital gown hung loose at the shoulder. My hands trembled in my lap. A bruise spread purple along one forearm where they had tried a line that failed. But my eyes were open, and I was there. Elaine covered her mouth. Mark looked at the floor for half a second and then arranged his face into concern. Joel stepped forward, stopped, and whispered, Dad. I looked at him last. Tessa leaned close enough for only me to hear. If you want to stop at any point, raise your hand. I nodded. Marisol came to my left side, but did not touch the chair until I looked at her. When I did, she placed one hand lightly on the handle, not steering, just present. We moved toward the conference room. Behind us, Elaine said, This is being handled completely wrong. I did not turn around. For once, my emergency was no longer theirs to handle. The conference room had no windows. That felt right. Some truths do not need scenery. A rectangular table, 8 chairs, a wall clock. A box of tissues placed in the center like the hospital knew families often mistake tears for evidence. Nora parked my wheelchair at the head of the table because Tessa asked where I wanted to sit, and I pointed there. It was a small thing, but small things become large when people have been speaking over your bed as if you are already furniture. Elaine sat on my right, leaving one chair between us close enough to claim daughterhood, far enough not to smell like guilt. Mark sat across from me and placed his phone face down on the table. Joel sat beside him, hands folded so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. Marisol stood until I pointed to the chair on my left. Sit, I whispered. The room froze around the sound of my voice. It was not strong. It was not theatrical. But it was mine, and everyone heard it. Marisol sat. Tessa opened the folder in front of her. This meeting is to discuss Mr. Reed's discharge planning, communication permissions, and care preferences. Mr. Reed is participating. He may pause or end the meeting. Elaine leaned forward. We are grateful he is awake, but this entire situation has been handled without us. Tessa looked at her. The hospital attempted to contact all listed family numbers. We were at sea. The portal log shows alerts were opened. Mark's eyes flicked up. There it was, not guilt yet, calculation. Elaine said, "Opening an alert is not the same as understanding the seriousness." I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, because if I did not laugh somewhere inside myself, I might break apart. My daughter had a master's degree in project management. She could turn a canceled dentist appointment into a spreadsheet with color codes. But an ICU alert about her father became vague when accountability entered the room. Tessa did not argue. She placed a printed timeline on the table. "We will go through what the hospital can document. Then Mr. Reed can state what he wants." "He should not be forced to do this right now," Elaine said. I raised my hand. Everyone stopped. The effort made my shoulder ache, but I held it there until the room understood I was not asking permission. Tessa turned to me. "Do you want to continue?" "Yes," I said. "One word. Gravel in it, pain in it, a whole life in it." Mark cleared his throat. "Dad, nobody is trying to take over. We are trying to make sure you get proper care." I looked at him, then at the cruise tan along his collar. Tessa slid the first page toward me. Call attempts, portal alerts, pharmacy notation, directive scan date. The documents were not dramatic. That gave them power. They did not accuse. They just stood there and let everyone else become visible beside them. Before discharge options, Tessa said, "We need to address communication authority. Mr. Reed's advance directive and release permissions name Ms. Vega under specific conditions. Mr. Reed is now able to answer for himself. He has declined to route all updates to Elaine Reed." Elaine turned to me as if I had slapped her. "Dad, I thought of teaching her to ride a bike in the church parking lot. I thought of the first time she got the flu, and Ruth and I took turns sleeping on the floor beside her bed. I thought of every version of her I had loved before this one." "You left," I said. The words were thin, but they crossed the table. Joel closed his eyes. Mark's phone buzzed face down, and nobody moved to answer it. For the first time in days, a call could wait. Tessa did not start with the worst line. Good advocates understand pacing too. They let facts build in the order people denied them. At 8:17 p.m., she said, 911 was called from Mr. Reed's apartment by Ms. Vega. At 8:42, emergency medical services arrived at Mercy North. At 9:36, the emergency department attempted family notification to Elaine Reed. At 9:38, Mark Reed. At 9:40, Joel Reed. Elaine looked down at her hands. "We were boarding," she said. Tessa made no note of the excuse. At 10:31, the first portal notification was opened from Elaine Reed's account. At 10:42, the second was opened from Mark Reed's account. Mark's mouth tightened. "Those alerts do not show details." "Correct," Tessa said. "They show emergency admission status and the instruction to call the hospital. We get spam through that portal all the time." This alert came from the emergency department. I did not know he was in ICU. I watched my son choose the smallest defensible sentence. He could not say he did not know I was in the hospital. He could not say no one called. So he moved the line to ICU as if the difference between emergency and intensive care would make the ocean shorter. Tessa turned the page. At 11:16 p.m., an administrative alert was marked family-aware follow-up pending from Mark Reed's account. Elaine looked at him. "Mark," he lifted both hands. "I do not remember clicking that." Tessa said, "The log does not tell us intent. It tells us the action." That sentence should be carved above every room where families rewrite themselves. Intent is the costume people put on after the record arrives. Mark leaned back. "I was on a ship with bad service." I probably thought it meant the hospital knew to contact Elaine. "The hospital did contact Elaine," Tessa said. "There was no return call." Elaine's eyes filled again. "I saw the alert after dinner. I thought it was about his medication refill. Dad calls about those things. He worries." I wanted to ask when worry became a reason not to call. Instead, I waited because the room was not finished becoming honest. Tessa placed another page down. At 7:12 the following morning, a user connected to Elaine Reed's Family Access account attempted to update billing contact preference. It did not process because the account lacks authorization. Elaine's head snapped toward Mark. Mark said, "That was probably Denise. She handles insurance forms." Denise was his wife. Denise had once told me that old people should simplify before they became a burden, which sounded like advice, until you heard the impatience underneath it. "Why would Denise touch Dad's billing?" Joel asked so softly I almost missed it. Mark glared at him. "'Cause someone had to." There it was again. The family motto in a new shirt. Someone had to. Someone had to answer the hospital. Someone had to sit in the waiting room. Someone had to read the pharmacy warning. Someone had to make sure I did not disappear into the cheapest bed near an airport. But the only had to Mark recognized was paperwork that might inconvenience him later. I raised my hand. Tessa stopped. I looked at Mark and forced the question through a throat that felt lined with sand. When I said, "Did I become an inconvenience?" nobody answered. Not because they did not understand the question, because they finally did. Then Tessa read the directive. Not all of it. She did not need to. She read the parts my children had laughed at in February. "I, Walter James Reed, being of sound mind, designate Marisol Vega as my healthcare proxy, if I am unable to make or communicate medical decisions. This designation reflects my trust in her availability, judgment, and knowledge of my stated wishes." Elaine made a small sound. Tessa continued, "I request that my treatment team consult my proxy regarding life-sustaining treatment medication decisions, transfer decisions, and post-acute care only when I lack decision-making capacity. If I regain capacity, my own stated wishes control." She placed the page flat on the table. Signed February 17th. Witnessed by Hannah Brooks and Peter Lynn. Notarized by Cynthia Hale. Scanned into Mercy North Network the same day. No one spoke. I looked at the signature. Mine, yes. Shaky, but certain. Mark recovered first. "Dad, you did this after you fell. You were scared." "Yes," I said. He blinked. I let the words sit. Of course I had been scared. Fear is not incompetence. Fear is often the first honest witness in the room. "You should have talked to us," Elaine said. I turned toward her. I tried. "About paperwork like this. About needing you." Her face changed, but not enough. Mark tapped the table once. "Family should matter more than paperwork." Tessa looked at him. "Family often matters through paperwork. It is how patients make sure their wishes are honored when emotions are high. You are saying a neighbor has more rights than his children. I am saying Mr. Reed had the right to choose the person he trusted for a specific medical role. Because she manipulated him." Marisol finally leaned forward. "Once, Mark," she said, "your father asked me 3 times whether I was willing. I told him to choose someone else if any of you would answer. He waited 2 weeks before signing. I did not ask for this, but you accepted it." "Yes." "Why?" Marisol looked at me, not at him, "Because he deserved to have one person who did not treat his fear like an interruption." That sentence moved through the room differently than the documents. Paper proves what happened. A sentence like that proves what it cost. Elaine covered her face. Joel whispered, "We did make jokes about it." Mark turned on him. "Not now." "Yes, now," Joel said. It was the first full sentence he had offered since entering the room, and it startled even him. He looked at me then, at Tessa. "He sent a picture of the forms in the group chat," Joel said. "We all made jokes." Elaine lowered her hands. Mark said, "It was a joke?" I thought of that night. My phone lighting up with laughing faces, Elaine typing, "Dad has appointed a soup czar." Mark sending a crown emoji, Joel writing Queen Marisol. I had smiled at the screen because a father learns to accept crumbs of attention and call it closeness. The form had been serious. They had made it small. Tessa gathered the pages. The directive stands. Mr. Reed is currently participating, so his voice is primary. The question is not who feels offended. The question is what plan he chooses. Elaine looked at me, then really looked. For a second, I saw the child who used to run down the bus aisle after school because she wanted to sit in the driver's seat before anyone else climbed on. That she said, "Why did you not trust us?" I wanted the answer to be complicated. It was not, because I said, "You taught me." There are rooms where anger would be wasted. The conference room was one of them. If I yelled, Elaine could cry harder. Mark could become reasonable. Joel could vanish into silence again. People know what to do with an old man's rage. They call it confusion medication, stress, grief age. They pat it down till the room feels safe for everyone except the person who was hurt, so I did not yell. I asked questions. Elaine, I said, when the first alert came, what did you do? Her mouth opened, closed. I thought, what did you do? She looked at Tessa, maybe hoping the patient advocate would save her from the question. Tessa only waited. I told Mark to check it, Elaine said. Mark's head jerked toward her. I turned to him. Mark, when she told you, what did you do? He leaned forward. Dad, the service was terrible. We were trying to get the kids settled. Denise was sick from the motion. It was chaos. What did you do? The room became very still. I opened it, he said. I thought it was handled. By who? He did not answer. That was when I understood how families like ours survive for years. Not through one big lie. Through little handoffs of responsibility into the dark. Elaine handed me to Mark. Mark handed me to the hospital. Joel handed me to everyone. By morning, they could all say they thought someone else had loved me enough. I turned to Joel. He was crying silently now. I had seen him cry like that once before, when he was 9, and backed the lawnmower into Ruth's rosebush. He had been more afraid of disappointment than punishment. Joel, I said, what did you do? He wiped his face with both hands. Nothing. The word landed harder because it was clean. Elaine whispered, Joel. He shook his head. No, I did nothing. I saw missed calls in the morning. I saw Elaine texting Mark. I told myself if it was serious, someone would have called again. They did, Marisol said quietly. Joel looked at her. I know. Mark pushed back from the table. This is absurd. We are sitting here like criminals because we went on a family trip. No, Tessa said. You are sitting here because Mr. Reed is deciding who participates in his care. After being turned against us, I raised my hand again. This time it barely shook. I am not against you, I said. Mark looked relieved for half a second. You are not in charge of me. Relief left his face. Elaine began to cry harder, but something in the crying changed. Less performance, more fear. We came back, she said. After the cruise? As soon as we could. After the cruise? She flinched. I was not trying to be cruel. I was trying to return time to its proper order. They wanted the story to begin with their arrival, their panic, their offense at being excluded. My body knew an earlier chapter. The floor, the ambulance, the phone calls, Marisol in the waiting room, a pharmacist's yellow note, a form signed under fluorescent lights because my children had taught me to prepare for their absence. I do not need you to suffer, I said. I need you to stop calling absence a misunderstanding. For the first time, no one defended the cruise. The wall clock clicked once. Then Erin Mills, the hospital social worker, entered with a blue folder and a stack of discharge options. The emotional part was not over, but the practical part had arrived, and practical things are where love either becomes real or excuses run out of places to hide. Erin Mills did not look like a man who enjoyed family drama. He looked like a man who had spent too many years turning impossible situations into checklists, because checklists, unlike people, can be completed. He was broad-shouldered, tired around the eyes, and kind in the unsentimental way of people who know kindness has to survive paperwork. Mr. Reed, he said, sitting across from me, I am going to review options. You can stop me any time. I nodded. Erin opened the blue folder. The care team recommends short-term cardiac rehab at Lakeview Recovery Medication Reconciliation with pharmacy follow-up physical therapy and a home safety evaluation before independent living resumes. Elaine leaned forward. Ridgeway has beds now. Erin did not look annoyed. That was impressive. Ridgeway has availability. It is not the team's first recommendation given distance from Mr. Reed's home cardiac follow-up needs and current mobility goals. Mark said Lakeview is expensive. Insurance review is pending, but initial eligibility looks favorable. Pending is not approval. Correct. So we could end up with bills. There it was. Not my breath, not my heart rhythm, bills. I had paid Mark's property taxes once after he said the escrow company made an error. I had covered Elaine's emergency car repair when she was 36 and still called me only after the tow truck arrived. I had sent Joel money for the twins' camp because he said they would be embarrassed if they stayed home. Money had moved from me to them so often it had become invisible, but the possibility of a bill attached to keeping me safe made Mark sit up straight. Aaron turned to me. "Mr. Reed, do you want cost estimates reviewed with Ms. Vega with your children or with you directly?" "Me," I said. "One word again, enough." Aaron wrote it down. Elaine looked wounded. "Dad, you should not have to handle that." I almost smiled. "I handled you." Joel made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been pain. I was tired, deeply tired. The kind of tired that starts in the bones and makes every light too bright. But the meeting had given me something medicine could not a way to separate love from control. Aaron continued, "Home safety evaluation, walker for 2 weeks, medication blister packs prepared by the pharmacy, follow-up appointment within 7 days, transportation support, permission for Marisol to receive scheduling updates if I approved." I approved. Elaine wiped her cheeks. "So we are just cut out." Tessa answered before I had to. "You are not cut out of relationship. You are removed from medical management unless Mr. Reed changes his mind." Relationship, management. I had never heard the difference stated so cleanly. Mark heard it too and hated it. "This is humiliating," he said. I looked at him. For who? He had no answer that would make him look good. Aaron slid a signature page toward me. "This is not final discharge. It authorizes us to continue planning with the Lakeview option and your chosen contacts." The pen felt heavy. My hand trembled. Marisol did not touch me. She knew better. She sat beside me and let me take the time. I signed my name. Walter James Reed. Not strong, not pretty. Mine. When I looked up, Elaine was staring at the page as if it had stolen something. It had not. It had simply returned something to the person it belonged to. After I signed the planning authorization, Mark acted as if the meeting should be over. That was how he handled discomfort. "Conclude the agenda before anyone names the damage." He gathered his phone, nodded once at Aaron, and said, "Fine. We will revisit this when Dad is rested." "No," I said. The word stopped him with one hand on the table. I had spent my life teaching children to stay seated until the bus fully stopped. Mark had forgotten that lesson too. Tessa looked at me. "Do you want to add care access preferences?" I nodded. She placed a clean page in front of me and waited. My voice would not carry a full paragraph, so I used the marker again. The letters came slowly, each one an effort. No one interrupted. Maybe they finally understood that watching me write was part of the consequence. Visits by invitation. No portal access without my written okay. Marisol may receive care schedules. I pay my own bills. Elaine read each line as if I were closing doors in her face. "Dad, this is extreme." I turned the board toward her. "No, this is specific." Aaron looked down, maybe to hide a smile. Specific had become my new mercy. For years I had given my children vague access because I was afraid clear limits would sound unloving. "Come by whenever. Call when you can. Tell me if you need anything. Use my spare key. Check the cabinet. Look at my mail if something happens." Vague love had let them drift in and out of responsibility while still feeling entitled to the rooms of my life. I was done being vague. Mark said, "So Marisol gets everything." Marisol answered before I could. "I get what Walter permits, nothing more. Until he changes his mind because you tell him to." She looked tired then. Not weak. Tired. "Your father has known me for 11 years. If I wanted what he had, I chose a strange way to show it. I have fixed his curtains, driven him to appointments, argued with him about tomatoes, and sat in this hospital all night for no pay." Joel whispered, 11 years. I looked at him. He did not know. That hurt in a different way. My youngest did not know how long the person he called an outsider had been carrying pieces of the life he never asked about. "I saw the first missed call," Joel said. Elaine closed her eyes. "Please stop." He shook his head. "No. I saw it before we boarded. I told myself Elaine would know what to do. Then, when Mark said it was probably medication stuff, I let that be enough." Mark snapped, "You are trying to look noble now." "No," Joel said. "I am trying to tell the truth once before Dad decides we are all the same." The room held its breath. I looked at Joel for a long time. I wanted his truth to fix more than it could. A father can hear one honest sentence and still ache for the years around it. "You are not all the same," I said. Joel started to cry again. "But none of you are in charge." That was the cleanest thing I had said all day. No one owned my recovery. Not my children through blood. Not Marisol through kindness. Not the hospital through procedure. It belonged to me with help I chose and boundaries I could understand. Tessa wrote the preferences into the record. Mark stood. "I need air." This time nobody stopped him from leaving. Some exits are just people practicing the absence they already chose. When Mark left the room, became smaller and more honest. That is not always what happens when the loudest person exits. Sometimes silence only gives everyone more space to lie. But that afternoon, with the door clicking shut behind my oldest son Joel, looked at me like he had been waiting years for the person who scared him most to stop speaking first. "Dad," he said, "I am sorry." Elaine began to object, then stopped. Maybe she heard something in his voice that did not belong to strategy. Joel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Not sorry because this looks bad. Not sorry because of paperwork. I am sorry because I let you become background noise." Background noise. That one hurt because it was accurate. Old fathers are easy to turn down. We call about small things, because small things are often how we ask whether we still matter. A refill question. A ride to the doctor, a light in the hallway that flickers, a birthday nobody mentioned yet. We learn to wrap loneliness in practical errands, because saying "I miss you" feels too naked when the person on the other end is busy. Joel looked at Marisol. "Thank you for answering." She nodded, but did not rescue him from the rest. He looked back at me. "I do not know how to fix it." "Time," I said. The word came out rough. Tessa asked if I wanted the board. I shook my head. Some things deserved voice, even if the voice was cracked. "Time," I said again, "not access." Joel wiped his face. "Okay." I believed that okay more than any promise he could have made. Promises are easy when someone might die. Okay is what a person says when he understands the punishment is not the point. Elaine folded her arms around herself. "I am sorry, too." I waited. She looked toward the door Mark had used. "I was scared." "When?" Her lips trembled. "When I saw you." I did not answer right away. The cruelest part of the day was not that my daughter had been scared. It was that her fear began when she saw consequences, not when she received the first call. "I believe you," I said. Relief moved across her face. "That is not the same as trust." Relief left. She lowered her head. For once she did not argue. Aaron asked whether I needed a break. Yeah, I did. My skin felt too tight. The room had begun to tilt at the edges. But I wanted one more thing said, while everyone who needed to hear it was present. "Marisol is not replacing you," I said. Elaine looked up. "She did what you did not." There was no kindness in pretending those sentences were the same. Tessa ended the meeting after that. She summarized the plan, the access limits, the discharge pathway, and the fact that I could revisit choices later if I wanted. That mattered too. Boundaries are not prisons. They are doors with locks that work. Nora returned to take me back to room 412. As she turned the wheelchair, Joel stood. "Can I visit tomorrow if you say yes?" I looked at him then, at Marisol, then at my hands resting weakly in my lap. "Call first," I said. He nodded like I had handed him something precious. Maybe I had. Not authority. Not forgiveness. Not the old family story. A beginning with rules. 3 weeks later, Marisol drove me home from Lakeview Recovery in her old green Subaru that smelled like mint gum and upholstery cleaner. I had argued for 15 minutes about taking a cab. She ignored me with great discipline. "You can be independent after lunch," she said. "This morning you are getting a ride." Lakeview had not been paradise. Rehab never is. It was work disguised as recovery, short walks down long halls, medication reviews with a pharmacist who asked good questions, a physical therapist named Dan, who smiled while committing acts of polite torture against my dignity. But it was close enough for Marisol to visit, close enough for Joel to come twice. after calling first close enough for Elaine to send one careful text that did not ask for anything. Mark did not visit. I wish that sentence did not still have weight. On the ride home, Marisol took the long way without asking. We passed the bus depot where I'd worked most of my life. The old brick building looked smaller than I remembered, as if retirement had stretched my memory and the real place had refused to grow with it. 2 yellow buses idled near the fence. A driver in a neon vest checked mirrors before pulling out. I pressed my fingers against the window. "You miss it?" Marisol asked. "Some days." The noise. The purpose. She drove another block before answering. "Purpose did not retire because you did. That was Marisol. She could turn a stop sign into a sermon if you gave her enough road." At my apartment, she walked me upstairs slowly. The kitchen had been cleaned. The prescription organizer sat on the counter with new labels. A yellow sticky note from Asha Patel, the pharmacist, reminded me of the follow-up call. My refrigerator envelope had been replaced with a red plastic sleeve that said medical directive in letters large enough for a sleepwalking paramedic to read. "Tessa suggested that," Marisol said. I nodded. My apartment looked almost the same. That surprised me. I had expected it to feel haunted by the floor where I fell. Instead, it felt waiting. The kettle, Ruth's photo, the bus calendar, the chair by the window where afternoon light gathered like a quiet animal. There was a stack of mail on the table, bills, insurance papers, 2 cards from senior center friends, 1 envelope in Elaine's handwriting, 1 in Joel's, none from Mark. I did not open them that day. Instead, I took out a notebook and wrote the words Senior Ride Fund at the top of a page. Marisol saw it. "Walter, I have pension savings. You also have medical bills." I said, "Fund not buy everyone a limousine." She folded her arms. "You were almost impossible before the ICU. Now you are impossible with paperwork." That made me laugh until I had to sit down. The idea was small at first. Ride vouchers for seniors who needed pharmacy, pick-up follow-up appointments, legal clinic days. Not charity with my name on a wall. Not revenge against children who failed. Just a way to make sure someone else did not sit on a staircase with a warning label in one hand and no ride to the next safe place. That evening, Joel called before visiting. I let it ring twice, not to punish him, but to remind myself I had a choice. Then I answered. Recovery did not feel like victory. It felt like learning which doors I could open slowly and which ones could stay closed until trust knocked properly. The first letter I read was not from my children. It was from Tessa Monroe. Technically, it was a discharge follow-up packet printed on hospital letterhead, not a letter in the old sense. No perfume, no cursive, no apology folded into 3 careful panels. Still, I read it at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me, and it felt more personal than half the birthday cards I had received in the last 10 years. Dear Mr. Reed, this packet confirms your follow-up appointments, medication review schedule, home safety recommendations, and patient advocacy contact information. No poetry, no drama, just follow-through. I read every page. Lakeview appointment, Dr. Henley, pharmacy review with Asha, physical therapy, transportation voucher pilot meeting at the senior center. A line reminding me that I could update my directive at any time while competent. That line mattered. My choices were not frozen in anger. They were mine to revise if trust ever became real again. Elaine's envelope sat unopened near the salt shaker. Joel's beside it. Mark's absence beside both. Marisol came over at 10 with a grocery bag and the expression of a woman pretending not to inspect my apartment for hazards. "You moved the rug," she said. "Dan the physical therapist threatened me." "Good man." She saw the envelopes. Her eyes moved away politely. "You can ask," I said. "I know." "Then why do you not—" She put oranges in the bowl. "Because not every closed envelope is asking for witnesses." That was friendship, too. Knowing when not to enter. I opened Joel's letter after lunch. It was short. He did not ask for access. He did not explain the cruise again. He wrote that he had called the senior center and offered to drive 2 voucher rides the next month if I allowed it. He wrote that he understood if I said no. He wrote, "I am learning the difference between helping and trying to be forgiven faster." I read that line 3 times. Then I put the letter back in the envelope and wrote "Call Joel Friday" on my calendar. Elaine's letter was longer. She apologized, then explained, then apologized again. Some of it was real. Some of it still tried to arrange the facts into a shape that hurt her less. I did not hate her for that. People do not surrender their favorite version of themselves all at once. I wrote "Call Elaine next week, maybe." Mark sent a text at 6:42 p.m. "Dad, we need to discuss how this affects the family going forward." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "When you are ready to discuss how it affected me, call Tessa's office to learn the visitation rules. Do not text Marisol." I did not add "Love, Dad," not because I did not love him, because love had become one of the words we used to avoid precision. That night I placed Tessa's packet in the red sleeve on the refrigerator. Beside it, I put the Senior Ride Fund notes, Asha's medication list, and a new emergency contact sheet with Marisol first, and my children listed under "Call after patient permission." It looked severe. It looked sad. It looked honest. Sometimes healing is not the moment everyone comes back together. Sometimes it is the first evening a man drinks tea in his own kitchen and knows that if the phone rings, he can decide whether the sound deserves him. The senior ride meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in the same room where I had signed my directive. Folding tables, bad coffee, a bulletin board with flyers curling at the corners. The notary with purple sneakers was there again, this time eating a cookie over a stack of volunteer forms. Life has a sense of humor if you survive long enough to catch it. I arrived early because old bus drivers do not trust schedules they did not make. Aaron Mills had connected me with the center director. Asha Patel had offered to speak once a month about medication questions. Joel had signed up for 2 rides and arrived exactly 6 minutes early, which I pretended not to notice. Elaine did not come. She had texted that she was not ready to face everyone. I answered, "Then start with one person. Call next week." She wrote back, "I will." Mark did not respond. There was an empty chair beside me. For years, empty chairs had embarrassed me. At school concerts after Ruth died, when my children promised to come and did not. At birthday dinners where I told the server to remove 2 place settings because something came up. At church breakfasts where people asked how the family was, and I said busy because busy sounded kinder than absent. That Thursday I saved the empty chair on purpose. Marisol arrived 5 minutes late carrying a folder, 2 pens, and the same blue cardigan with the missing button. "You saved me a seat," she said. "You answer your phone." She sat down and bumped her shoulder lightly against mine. No cameras, no dramatic announcement, no children bursting through the door with flowers. Just a room full of people trying to make a small system better before the next emergency exposed who had none. When it was my turn to speak, I stood with one hand on the table. My legs still did not trust me completely. That was all right. Trust can return slowly and still return. "I am not funding this because my children failed me," I said. "I am funding it because a pharmacist warned me, a neighbor answered, a nurse told the truth, an advocate followed the paper, and a social worker helped me make a plan. A life is rarely saved by one grand gesture. It is saved by a chain of people doing the next right thing." Nobody clapped at first. I liked that. It meant they were listening instead of trying to end the feeling. I told them to fill out directives before a crisis, to choose emergency contacts who would answer, not relatives who would be offended by not being chosen, to keep medication lists where responders could find them, to stop confusing access with love. Then I sat down before my knees made the decision for me. Joel drove the first voucher ride the following Tuesday. He called me afterward not to report like a child asking for a grade, but to say the woman he drove had reminded him of his grandmother. He was learning, slowly, with rules. Elaine called the next week and asked if she could bring soup. I told her yes, 1 hour, no medical questions. She came, cried once, washed the bowl before leaving, and did not ask for my portal password. That was a beginning too. Mark stayed angry longer. Some people treat boundaries as betrayal because they were comfortable with the old arrangement. I loved him from the other side of the locked door and let him decide whether he wanted to knock like a son instead of enter like an owner. As for Marisol, she still overcooks rice and still says my chili needs less salt. She is not my replacement family. She is Marisol. That is enough. The children I raised are still my children, but they are no longer the automatic answer to every question my body might ask in a crisis. If there is one thing I want you to hear, it is this. Do not wait until you are lying under fluorescent lights to decide who gets to speak when you cannot. Love is not the person who arrives after the danger has passed and demands authority. Love is the person who answers before there is anything to gain, stays within the boundaries you set, and helps you stand without trying to own the ground beneath your feet.